How's it going, Blamers? And welcome back to Blame It on Mel. Today's guest once got paid by the Mormon Church to teach its truth claims and defend its history. Now he's a licensed counselor and sex therapist, helping people unpack shame, guilt, and sexual dysfunction caused by high control religion. We're diving into faith crisis, purity culture, deconstruction, and what healthy sexuality should look like. Welcome, Mike Fuller, to Blame It on Mel.
Thanks, Mel.
Thanks for being here. So you grew up in the Mormon Church. Surprise, surprise.
Born and raised on one side of the family. I'm seventh generation. So my first family were in the 1830s in New York.
Okay, so you're an original pioneer.
Yes.
Okay, so let's real quickly kind of go through some of your beginnings. So you grew up in the church. You went on a mission.
Yeah, so I grew up in the church here in Boise, Idaho, just a regular old 1990s family. Went to church regularly, but didn't do everything at home like everybody else might have. Served a mission in the end of the 1990s in Poland. Came back and met a cute girl at church. Met and married within 6 months right after I returned from my mission. She had also served a mission before that. And here we are now 26 years later, still happily married, but living a different life.
Well, congratulations. That's a really long time. Has there been anything in your childhood upbringing in the church that is something that is interesting, or did you just live a normal Mormon life?
Yeah, just a normal Mormon life. My family would, we'd do family home evening maybe after there was a lesson on it. When I got home from my mission and got married, thought I wanted to go into education. My wife suggested I go in to teach seminary, which we joke about now that was her fault that we made that decision. No, nothing. I don't think anything special about my childhood.
Why did you choose the path to go into teaching for the church over being a school teacher or a professor? We
thought it would be a better option to teach for the church than teach for public education. And I think it was. I remember after I'd been teaching for a few years, the church paid for a master's degree, and I got a master's degree in education with a lot of other teachers. And me and another seminary teacher took most of our classes together, and they would complain about, public education. And we just look at each other and think, man, we've got a good employer. The church was a good employer for seminary teachers.
Do they pay well compared to typical teacher salaries?
Compared to teacher salaries, yeah. So they've changed a lot right now. I think they pay teachers that have been on forever. They paid us more like administrators. And so we worked through the summers and got paid more like an administrator would. So probably made as much as I would in that career, but I would have had to have been an administrator to do it. At the end of when I got hired in January of 2021, a year after we got married, so 2001, and I was fired in 2021. So I worked for exactly 20 years. And at that time, I was making just under six figures with benefits.
I mean, that's a lot more than a teacher.
Yeah, but not a lot more than an administrator.
Basically, we're able to do that with just a 4-year degree. You didn't have to go to more school.
I did. I had a master's degree. They paid me for that. So one thing that happened in the process, the early 2010s, when the church came out with the gospel topic essays, which you might be familiar with. At the same time, they added a new pay scale for us as seminary teachers. And most teachers get paid by years of teaching and levels of education. So if you have a bachelor's degree, you can make this much, and if you get a master's degree, you got a new scale. Then they added two internal certifications, I call them, and they were basically, each of them were allowed the teachers to do 12 projects, and they were just real projects, to become better seminary teachers, where going to school to get a master's in education helped me be a better educator in general. But then these were specific. And so in the 2010s, when my wife, Carrie, was reading the gospel topic essays and had lots of questions reading them, I read them as one of these 12 projects, and at the end of finishing them, I got an $8,000 raise. So
Okay, so you didn't get the $8,000 just for reading the essays. You got
it was
it
one
as
twelfth of the
part.
process. Yeah.
Okay, and then would that $8,000 would be a bonus every year, or is it
Yeah.
just for that year?
Yeah. It was just an increase in my salary.
And had you read the CES letter prior to reading the essays?
Nope. I didn't know what the CS letter was.
So your wife then, when she read the essays, is that what started giving her doubts?
In seminary and institutes for the employees, which is 90, still largely male employees, they would invite our spouses. They call it spouses, but we knew it was wives. Actually, it was husband and wives convention to all these trainings. And in one of the trainings, a general authority had encouraged us and our wives and our spouses to read the gospel topic essays and know them like the back of your hand. And I read them just to regurgitate, just to to do better at what I was doing. She remembers sitting up in the middle of the night reading about church's history on their essays on polygamy, looking over at me while I was asleep, and just she knew 7 years before I was fired that one day it would be over.
What was it about the polygamy that she had a hard time with in the essays?
I think just the fact that it was saying, hey, you'd have to ask her, but just hey, yeah, it's all true. Because at the time, if you look in the church's church, if you look, and I've done this, there is not there. I think I found in the late 1990s there is one sentence in an official church document. So if you look, open up a book or magazine that says published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they did not say that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. And so even just admitting that, just to say that he was a polygamist, and she didn't know about the teenage, there's the phrase in there that says, a, a woman just shy of her 15th birthday, you know, we weren't aware of these type of things.
So, okay, so I have not read the essays, and I do think that there is a lot of people that have not read the essays as well. But in the essays, that is something that the church puts out, is that they are giving the information about Joseph Smith as a polygamist and that he did marry children.
Yeah. And so it also says in the gospel topic essays a phrase something to the effect of Emma might not have known about all of his polygamous wives. So for her reading it, she realized Joseph Smith was a liar. He did, I think it's lying to not tell your partner about sexual or relate, or even if, some people will argue whether or not Joseph Smith had sex with all these women or girls, but they're just the feminist. Her reading them, it just didn't feel right.
Why? Well, why do you think that the church would do that? Why do you think that they would come out and kind of out themselves?
Because the information was coming out. The stuff that we were told about Joseph Smith, about the church, about polygamy, we were told they were all lies. And now, church historians for decades, over 100 years, have been writing these things, but all of us at the time as church members, we will say, no, that's a lie. But with the advent of the internet, with this information so freely available, they realized, hey, we have to get ahead of this. We've been behind it for so long. And so she just realized, if you're going to, I hadn't, as a church employee, I only read and taught from church materials. I never read a church material that said an angel with a flaming sword told Joseph Smith that if he didn't marry some teenage brides that he would die.
All of that information is in the essays.
Mm-hmm.
That is so interesting because I didn't learn any of this about polygamy until just recently, because that's never been taught. It's not a topic. I mean, you as a teacher, right? That is not something that you ever taught your students, correct?
There are no less. There's even the lesson on the section in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, that's pretty scary to read now. It just basically says, women are property, and if you don't engage, and if you don't marry them, you'll be destroyed. That's what the angels told them. We just taught from the first 20 verses saying that marriage is important. They really stuck to the whatever lesson they wanted us to teach. I hadn't read that. I might have read it once, but not to teach it. It's just a lot of information that they were able to hide and tell. they couldn't anymore.
So did your wife, Carrie, come to you immediately and tell you that she was struggling with what she was reading?
She reminds me that she told me once after one of our trainings that she'd attend with me. I think we were in the parking lot of a grocery store, and she told me that she had doubts about Joseph Smith. And she says I gave her a nice, polite answer and said, as long as you still believe in Jesus, it's okay. But yeah, she had this process going on for quite a few years without me realizing it. And then in January of 2020, right before COVID hit, she told me she was done with the church. A child of ours had been disciplined by a bishop for masturbating, and she was done. And I taught for another year and was fired in January of 2021 for expressing doubts.
So she had read this in 2013,
Mm-hmm.
and it took her 7 years. And so it wasn't really that she was having the doubts. It was more so when it affected one of her children.
Part of it too, most people, when they quit going to church, they get a 10% bump in their income because they stop paying tithing. When you're a church employee, it's a little different. We lost our livelihood. So it's scary. It was scary for that year. I would label us a mixed faith marriage for at least that year. Now we're both quite on the same page.
When she told you that she was done going to church, were you fearful that you were going to lose your job even if you continued to be faithful?
Yes. I was afraid that entire year that I would lose my job. I lived in constant fear that she would be found out, that then when I had doubts that I would be found out. And for a while, I thought, oh, this would be great. I can be I didn't know the phrase at the time, but this mixed faith marriage, but I can have a wife that's not believing, teach faithfully. And she would have supported that. She just said, hey, you need to do what you do. I will do what you'd like. And I said, no, I want you to live authentically too. And so we both wanted to we both would have sacrificed for each other, but we both wanted to be authentic. And when I expressed doubt, though, they said, okay, thanks for teaching for 20 years. Goodbye.
What was the length of time between your wife saying that she was out and you starting to have your own doubts?
I actually have receipts. It was less than a month. I wrote an email to her, the only person on the planet. It was a retired colleague. I couldn't send an email to colleagues, to supervisors, to even my bishop or my stake president. I taught all their children. They could have, so bishops and stake presidents can withhold an ecclesiastical endorsement for church employees, and I would have lost my job. So I actually, within a month, have an email that I sent to a retired former colleague saying, hey, this does not make sense to me. It was largely about Joseph Smith and polygamy.
Why did you choose that person to send that email to?
Because I knew they were the least likely person to tell my boss and cause me to lose my job.
Did that person respond?
Yeah, with just your normal, hey, you have faith, be believing, etc. It was with the best they could, being in the state they were at.
So the person that had retired that you sent that email to, did that person also have doubts?
No, not that I was aware of. I just knew them to be a safe person.
Why?
I'd worked with them for a long time, but they were the only the main criteria was that they weren't either in my ward or stake, and they weren't a current employee.
Do you remember what that thing was? Was it one thing that made you have doubts? Was there multiple things? Was it also your son and his discipline, or what was it that brought you to that point?
Everything, to realize that, hey, this doubts in faith, but then just knowing that, hey, the way that LGBTQ plus individuals are treated, the way that blacks were treated when they weren't allowed the priesthood, the way that women are treated historically and in general, the fact that they're not allowed to have leadership positions, and realizing that, hey, what I've been thought or taught this whole time really isn't true.
So it was an entire year, and a month into that year, you started having doubts. So for 11 months, you had to stand up in front of all of these students and teach something that you no longer believed in?
That was all during COVID. So my lessons turned to be online and were only about a half hour long. So it was because of COVID, it was really easy. But if it would have been probably, it probably wouldn't have lasted as long if it wasn't for it being through COVID.
So do you feel like you could have continued teaching and not believed it? Do you feel like it would have impacted your teaching ability?
Yeah, I still taught what I believed. I still believed heavily in Jesus at the time. And so I still taught a lot about Jesus. And it was easy to teach about Jesus when you're teaching from the Book of Mormon, because at the end, it's all about Jesus. So no, I only taught what I felt a need to teach authentically. And realizing, hey, I can't authentically teach the church's history to these students, that's when I expressed doubt and then got fired.
Well, because there's a lot of teachers that don't believe in evolution that are science teachers, and they're still able to teach that to students. So you don't think that you could have ever done that?
I only taught at the end there what I felt authentic about. So I don't think I expressed doubt and got fired for it. So
Who did you express doubt to?
I was the principal at a program, and my supervisor came and just asked how things were going. And at the end of within 2 hours later, he said, "Hey, I'll teach your classes for you." And they asked me not to go back into the classroom.
Have you had a teacher ask, or have you had a student ask you a question that you struggled to answer with the truth?
There wasn't room during COVID for kids to ask questions that were that deep. It was so, I didn't see my students.
Have you had any students reach out to you?
Yep. Some of them have expressed concern as to why I would give up all this to be so supportive of LGBTQ plus individuals. Some of them have said, "Hey, I'm there too. Welcome. I'm glad you're with me."
If a student came to you today and came to you with the CES letter and the essays, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to trust themselves, and I don't believe those things anymore.
So what kind of a hardship did you experience after being fired?
We went from, like I said, we lost our income. My wife was basically a stay-at-home wife, a stay-at-home mother, and I guess they call them trad wives now. She had had worked a few different jobs, but it was just a big wake-up call for both of us. We, on paper, probably should have sold our house, but we're able to keep it and just didn't spend any money for a couple of years. That's for sure.
And so then you got into counseling. And so why sex therapy now?
Yeah, why sex therapy is because most of my clients experienced either this high demand religion or other high demand religions. I think the best answer I got from another sex therapist is because Mormons do sex so well, and they were joking.
That's so true. So what came up? What did you feel like kept coming up amongst your clients about sex?
Just all the time, working mostly with sexually diverse individuals and gender diverse individuals at that nonprofit. It was all the time. Like, hey, I'm gay, I'm a lesbian, I'm bisexual, I'm non-binary, I'm cisgender, I'm transgendered, right? So it was really, when I started my first internship in college, I found this Flourish therapy, and I thought, that'd be a really good first internship site for me to learn about the world that I've sort of ignored as a religious educator. And 4 years later, I'm still there. So it just was, with all my clients, was a topic that needed addressed. And now most of my clients are in my private practice, either couples or males, and men are told that they can't have solo sexual behaviors or activities, and that they're evil if they do, and have a lot of shame. So it's just, I think, really comforting for my clients to when I say, "Oh, I experienced that same upbringing."
How do you feel like purity culture impacts couples long term?
First of all, let's talk about purity culture is.
Okay.
When you hear the phrase purity culture, there's at least five main beliefs that researchers have identified. The first one is a belief in virginity. That's an actual thing that's important. It's the most important thing that individuals, especially females, should keep and have. The second main belief in purity culture is ownership of bodies, right? That right we have these beliefs that, oh, our body doesn't belong to us, it belongs to our God, and therefore we, especially when it comes to sex, are violating their possession of this body if we engage in sexual activities, or especially, or even worse, if you're female, you're told your body might not just belong to your God but to your father, then to your husband. So this ownership model of sex, of our bodies.
So basically, your body belongs to every other being, whether they are real or spiritual, but not yourself.
And I don't think it's I think it's important to point out those other beings are usually male.
Is that more important, do you feel like, in relation to women or men?
I think it affects them both differently, right? So it tells women that they need to control their but that they have to, as you experience, and you've talked to many of your podcast episodes with other people, right? You've said that it says I have to, I have to monitor how I dress, because then the other flip side of that is that, right, with our bodies we're responsible for the beliefs of other people and the actions, right? As you've discussed with some other people, right? That what you wear is can cause men. I mean, that's the great quote from President Dallin, is that women, if you dress immodestly, become pornography for men. And then in a follow-up interview a couple years later, he told Sherry Dew with his wife there, he says, I'm one of those men that's happened to. So that ownership, that responsibility of the thoughts of other people. A couple other main beliefs in purity culture are that sex is only allowed in heterosexual relationships that are married for the purpose of procreation. So anything outside this missionary reproductive sex is wrong, bad, or evil. And the last one is that, the only possible value of a relationship is towards marriage, that all relationships need to be towards marriage. For example, if I have a client who's gay or lesbian, I'll still often hear them say, I know I don't believe this anymore, Mike, but every time, and this is like a female client will say, every time I go on a date with a new woman, I still think in my head, is this person's marriage material, right? That's still ingrained in our heads. So first of all, I think it's helpful to talk about what purity culture is. And to answer your question, why does it affect us so much, is because it creates shame. Shame is the fears of abandonment. And shame is a cultural concept. People don't learn shame on their own. They learn it from their caregivers. That their caregiver says, I will abandon you if you engage in those behaviors. Their partners say, I will abandon you if you engage in those behaviors. And if they're outside those purity culture norms, it's fear and shame and secrecy is my answer to your question. It's shame that based on fear of loss, of losing people, of losing community, of losing someone's approval. And then with that fear, because of that fear, it creates secrecy.
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband, I remember when he came to me, and he actually had to write a letter because he couldn't tell me, and he handed me the letter and had me read it out loud. Because he couldn't say it, but it was just after some general conference. I think it was like, how priesthood had their own thing that women aren't allowed to attend. And they had said, husbands, there is nothing that you can tell your wife that you will not be forgiven for. So it was something that he felt like he was safe to be able to tell me. And in that letter, he had told me that he was addicted to pornography. I remember just thinking, like, this is going to destroy my marriage. This is the end of my marriage, and thinking how devastating that could be. But also that he was trembling and crying as a grown man, upset about the fact that that he was doing this. And I still like I have a really hard time even saying like masturbating and pornography. Like, why do I have a hard time still saying that? And why did he feel so terrified and that he had hidden this for years, and how that was able, like, that affected our marriage?
I hear that all week long. Probably not quite daily, but close to it. These stories the message you were told is if my husband views pornography, or if my husband masturbates or basically has sex without me, that it's going to ruin our marriage, and that is not the truth.
It was, until I told him that I wanted him to show me. I was like, show me what you're looking at. And I was like, it's not that bad. I was like, this isn't that bad.
I regularly tell if a couple or a male client comes to me and says, I'm afraid to show my wife, I just say, imagine what do you think it would be if right? How do you think what do you think would happen if you were to show your wife with what you shared with me? We process that, right? Honesty is an important sexual health principle. Now, honesty is different from just sharing everybody, all of our thoughts. But being honest in our behaviors is a sexual health principle that I teach to clients and we practice. I'll ask them, what was it like to share that with me? What's it like for you to share that with me is what it's something I would have said to you if we were in a therapy session. We're not, right? But that is exactly the fear we are told, that these things are the worst two things that an adult can do is either be gay or lesbian or view pornography.
Well, what about fantasies? What about if people have fantasies? Like, do you find that as well, that they're coming in and wanting to be curious?
Yeah, fantasies are just fascinating, right? All right, a fantasy is a mental thought, right, that increases our arousal or eroticism. And that is the number one. It's quite high. I can't remember the statistics, but right. The number one most common fantasy for both men and women is simultaneous multiple partners.
Can we just call it a threesome? Do we have to be so clinical?
We can call it a threesome, right? Well, sometimes it's more than a threesome, okay?
Like what? Explain.
Foursome, orgies. It just depends on the individual. But the most common is fantasies. The second most common is things that are, taboo or not allowed, like BDSM type bondage or sadomasochism, those power type situations. And the third most common is just something new. All right, let's have new sex, new location, new position, right? New activities to just not. The third most common is novelty.
What does that mean? What does novelty mean?
Just doing it different, doing it new, right? Let's have sex in a new location. Let's have sex in a different position, in a new position. So doing something with your partner, but just doing something new, right? The other most common ones, and this is from research in a book by a guy named Justin Lehmiller, is right having sex with different people, not with your partner. So like ethical or non-ethical non-monogamy.
Non-ethical and ethical, does that mean with permission or without?
Yeah. So one of the top most common sexual fantasies is to have sex with somebody else, whether my partner has given me permission or not. It's a fantasy, right? Other fantasies include, just like I said, new experiences, taboo things. Like it's not allowed. To have sex with people watching might be, a sexual fantasy. These are the 7 most common sexual fantasies. And just knowing that, if a listener right now has had a sexual fantasy, I've listed the categories. That's normal.
So do you think, or have you found in your studies, or have you learned that this is more common with people that waited to have sex until they were married because they hadn't been able to experiment before, right? Like, if you're curious about what it's like to have sex with somebody else, does that curiosity go away if you were sexually active before you were married?
I think the easy answer to your question is yes. It's the more controlled, more, I'll say the word suppressed, less normal sexual exploration that people get to experience as in adolescence, for example, right? If someone lives in a more high demand household or religion and like you said, doesn't get to have the opportunity to have sex before marriage, yeah, these can cause these can be a big source of these problems, especially, and I know you'll probably mention this because you've had this mentioned in other episodes, right? Especially when we have these partners that thought they both saved sex before marriage and one of them didn't. They find out later. Or one of them, hey, I was sexually promiscuous, or I've been married before, and they married to somebody the first time who has never had sex with anybody else together. You're doing this whole church scene together, then 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years later, you do this religious deconstruction, and either both partners are like, hey, do I really want to do life with you anymore or sex with you anymore? And maybe the one partner got to experience it before they were married or has been unfaithful. The other partners might not have been able to. So yeah, these discrepancies do come up in my office quite often.
I joined the church when I was 19, so I had sexual partners before. I feel like that just kind of goes with the whole like C card, right? Like you're not a virgin. And so I had experienced all those things, but my husband had only had sex with me. And so that's something where he was very curious and he also felt like it wasn't really fair, I guess, in a way. Like it wasn't really fair because I got to experience that and he didn't, where he had a little bit of jealousy, I would say, that I got to live that experience and he didn't. Do you find that also within marriages?
Yeah, I've experienced that with clients. Right, just like we just said, you partner A got to had more sexual experiences before they got married. Now partner B is like, it's not fair, or maybe they're okay with it, but the main thing is having these conversations, right? When we probably don't have these conversations until later on, until we have these doubts in our religion or one of us has doubts. It's done, unfortunately, because religion, right, just teaches us, don't have sex until, it's gross, save it for your best friend. Instead of teaching you sexual health principles like consent or honesty or mutual pleasure or doing protection and safety or having shared values, right? Instead of teaching these sexual health principles that I've been taught and teach my clients as a sex therapist, we don't have the opportunity. People don't usually end up in my office until they've violated these sexual principles, like honesty, like they've exploited their partners, might have engaged in non-consensual behaviors, right? That's when they show up in the sex therapist office.
Well, I love that you brought up the honesty thing because I feel like that is and that is the purity culture, right? That creates that dishonesty. Mm-hmm. And my husband, he was actually kind of excited that I had sex before because he thought that meant that I was going to be experienced and I knew how to do everything, right? All of those things. But like sex when you're, 18 and younger, that's not real sex, right? Like nobody really knows what they're doing. You're not really experimenting, right? Like you're still in high school, freshman year of college. It's not like something that you get good at in a short amount of time. And so for him, he was actually extremely disappointed that I was just very vanilla, right? Because I didn't know anything. I had never experienced kind of what he thought. I think maybe he kind of thought that I was going to be what he sees in porn because I was experienced, but he wasn't honest with me and to tell me this is what I was hoping for, and I didn't get that. And so he spent so many years unhappy with our sex life instead of just saying, hey, this is what I expected. This is what I wanted. I didn't get that. Can we talk about it? Where are you at? Where are you willing to try these other things? Because I want to try these other things, even like sex toys, right? Like those are not things that in the Mormon church are considered anything but taboo. I mean, it's not okay. You're not really supposed to be using any of those things, or you're dirty, right?
Unfortunately, that's the message we somehow get, even though I don't know that it's official. I will say that.
Well, you have to understand, when I was in the temple for the very first time, when I received my garments right before, I think it was the day before I got married, and the temple matron, she told me that having sex was only to create a baby. That is what she told me. And she also told me that that was the only time I was allowed to take my garments off besides showering, and that I wasn't allowed to sleep naked. Like, as soon as we have sex, even the first night, as soon as you have sex, you have to put your garments or clean up. She goes, go clean up and then put your garments directly back on. So it's like I was preconditioned in this temple when all of this weird shit's happening in the first place, and I'm in a fucking twilight zone, right? And she's telling me, like, sex is not supposed to be an enjoyable experience. It's only to procreate, and don't even think about like like you can't even sit and hold each other and enjoy each other's naked bodies. Like, that's not okay. And I was told that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That is purity culture right there, saying sex is only for procreation. And the sad thing is, it's also, like you said earlier, right? The idea that if we talk about sex, that means we have problems. And my favorite author, you're probably familiar with her book, Emily Nagoski. She wrote the book Come As You Are, and the second book Come Together, and the third book called Burnout, which is not quite sex related, but is in my book. She just says the one myth I wish we could eradicate from the earth is the idea that if you talk about sex, that means you have problems with sex. She's like, it's the opposite. Couples that enjoy sex, they talk about it all the time. And I heard this in a podcast, and she says all the time. If you like something, talk about it. If you like food, you talk about food. If you like sports, you talk about sports. With your partner, if you like sex, you talk about sex. I wish that the message was that you were told was, hey, this is important for the two of you. You can now have sex with this partner, and you've made a covenant, just have sex with him. So talk about it with him. I wish that's the message you got.
I mean, I wish that would have been the message as well, but it was not. And I just think about like what you said, where you're like, it's not really something that's taught, but it really is taught. I do remember one time showing up to my husband did summer sales, and summer sales, pest control, door to door. They're all Mormons, right? And the owner of the company was Mormon. And I remember we went through security to get onto a cruise that we were going on with the company, and the owner's wife, something had triggered going through security, and they opened up her bag, and it was an entire bag of sex toys. And I remember all of us wives were just like, oh, that is so terrible, like awful. It was like we had so much less respect for her, and we were so judgmental because that was not okay in the Mormon church. That is not something that we do.
And I wish we didn't get that message, right? Like you said, having sex toys, using a vibrator. There's a great book written by a nurse. The name is Cindy Snarky. It's called Permission of Pleasure. And one of the chapters it's written from a female for women. She says, chapter 1 is permission to be sexual, but then chapter 20 or so is permission to use a vibrator, right? That's the first step in this process, is giving yourself permission, right? These are the messages you unfortunately got, whether it was official or not. I wasn't saying you didn't hear it, right? But that's the message you got, was that having sex that's anything that's not missionary sex for the purpose of procreation with your married partner is the moral message is that you're evil. The media says you're inadequate, and the medical messages says you're gonna die if you do it. And so we have these sources of messaging that send this message of fear around sex, instead of, hey, here's a vibrator as a wedding gift.
I also think because we are conditioned, and I was less conditioned than a lot of other Mormons because I came in later in life at 19, and so I didn't really get the early years. However, I think about the fact that my husband always wanted to do doggy style, and I was like, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts, and didn't want to do it. Told him it hurts, right? Like, then after we left the church, because we only did missionary, that's it. Like, because I had it in my psyche after, because like talking to friends and things, that is like really the only way that it's like more like love making or how you're supposed to have sex. And so after we left the church, then of course I was more open to like, okay, let's try more things, like all, and then it didn't hurt anymore. And so I just wonder, was that my body telling me, like, before, like, it was painful because I thought that it was wrong, but now that I don't think that it's wrong, now it's not painful, and actually it feels way better than just regular missionary. Is that a thing?
It is absolutely a thing. Let's look first at biologically what might be causing things, then socially, right? We have all these factors, and then let's look at what it might have been. And I think it would have exactly like you said, because you have this message that if it's not face-to-face sex, that it's wrong or bad, that it was your vagina, your muscles, your pelvic floor was saying no to this, even though you and he were verbally saying yes to it. But now, like you said, now that it was allowed, it's okay. So giving yourself permission, educating yourself on these things, and then practicing these, that's probably exactly what you experienced, is that you were experiencing this pain during entry, this inability for some females, it's like even pain to insert a tampon, right? Women that are raised in high demand religions and purity cultures experience this more than other women do. And one of the things I do with most of my clients, which, right, is to go through their lives and identify, either in therapy or as homework, all the messages you received around sex from childhood on. And so you've identified these message that missionary sex is the only okay sex. So that means doggy style is not okay and anal sex is not okay. Now, when you list all the messages you received, to go through and identify whether or not you want to keep that message or what you want to replace it with. And that's my definition of sex, is to presently explore pleasure together.
So you were talking about all of the teachings that are programmed from the Mormon Church. Looking back now, what do you feel like is the most damaging thing that is taught about sex?
That it's shameful, that we should be afraid of it, and that we shouldn't talk about it.
During the premarital era, because I feel like it still continues to carry on into marriage.
This purity message, the message that sex is bad, unless it's only, like you said, only with your married partner, who has to be heterosexual and has to be looking at you when you do it.
Is that the message that most people get? Is that you have to be looking at the person?
It just depends on like I said, and that's why I mentioned that, not officially but unofficial, right? They're right. You experience, and I wasn't trying to downplay your experience, right? But the church has all these official message, and then all these unofficial. Yeah, their official messaging is bad enough, right? It is harmful enough to people's sexual health. But the message, whether or not these details, they just has a lot to do with the personal experience that people have.
Well, it just seems like, because you're basically being told, like, no, 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 don't do any of this, right? Like, no touching, even, like, no exploring. There's none of that allowed before marriage. And then you get married, and then you're still told that there are all of these conditions that you should have within your marriage. Like, is that damaging?
It is. Look at what it's done to you. Yeah, I had some personal similar experiences myself where, oh, is this allowed? It's not if it's not, right, like you said, if it's not exactly whatever cultural messages we got, both directly because officially or directly unofficially, like you experienced in the temple, these messages that Sex, first of all, is a shameful thing. That you were told that the message you got is that if you're not doing it exactly like you think you've been told, that you should feel shame around it, and that causes fear. And so you don't talk when we fear and shame is the fear of being abandoned. So you got this message that if you even talk to your husband about it, to correct me if I'm wrong now, that it might cause the two of you a rupture in your relationship, some abandonment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the other thing that I feel like too is that because that temple matron had told me that I needed to go clean up, which I took that as I need to go shower and then put my garments back on before I go to sleep. Well, that you have to understand that is a lot of work. That is also a lot of work to a young mom that has a lot of children, that doesn't get a lot of sleep, and you are expected to keep a house in perfect condition. And also you have these high demand callings and all the things that come to having that appearance of being the perfect Mormon trad wife, which I absolutely killed it at. But I was so freaking tired that the last thing I wanted to do was have sex with my husband, because I had to then shower afterwards and I just didn't want to do it because I was tired. And
Yes, so you got this message that every time you had sex, you had to shower because she said to go clean up first, then put your garments back on.
and I was obedient and did that.
So you were told there's a right way to do it. I think that's the to answer your question. What is it that there are right and wrong ways to do sex? No, there's as long as it's consensual, no one's experiencing unwanted pain. Some people want to experience some form of pain, and and people can leave at any time they want, which is more just a continuation of consent. It's good sex.
Well, also the thing is too is that, like, how is it anybody else's business to tell somebody how they should have sex?
That leads my mind in thinking about a long conversation about the role of religion, right? That religions are there to provide us with answers to questions, to help us deal with existential fears, but they use control, right? If we do wrong and there's rules to them, we can sin, and if we sin, we'll turn to them for absolution or repentance, and give them their money, give them our money. And so that right, that takes me into a huge world of outside of sex therapy, is why they feel they could do that.
Why does the church use that as a sense of control?
For me as a sex therapist, shame and fear are harmful. For religions, they're tools.
So my husband had an affair on me, and he was in the bishopric at the time, and so we had to go to the stake president. And the stake president had basically, there was no discipline given to him whatsoever because he was in the bishopric, and that would have been something that would have been public, right? Like, he had just been put into the bishopric, and so we had to keep it very quiet. But also, I was given the instructions that basically I was not having sex with my husband enough, and that I needed to have sex with him more. And I immediately got the blame, I felt like. And so that was also something that sexually was very hard on our marriage, because I had internalized his shame was my shame. Like, what does that do to somebody mentally?
Right. That goes back to the purity culture that we talked about, right? That right, purity culture in essence is created by men to protect men. And the message you unfortunately got was you're responsible, and here's the message of purity culture. We're responsible, especially women, of our partner's sexual behaviors and fulfill those needs. That's the message you got, right? The message I wish you'd gotten was that, right, you two are partners, and you have your own sexuality, and you get to discuss to what degree right, how much these sexualities overlap, how satisfied you feel in your relationship, right? I think it creates the problem by also creating the fear to talk about it. Instead of being able to say, come up to you and saying, hey, I'm feeling blank in our relationship. And whatever that blank is, he didn't feel like he could come talk to you about it.
I have found in speaking to a lot of people, guests and friends, and they are continually blamed for their husband's sins, I guess, if you would call it that.
Let's put some of that shame back on him,
Yeah.
on these men, right? This is the experience we have. So what you actually experienced was dishonesty to the level of exploitation. So those are two of the seven principles of healthy sexuality, is to be non-exploitive. So we exploit somebody when we use power, control, or dishonesty to get what we want. So one of the biggest sexual health principle is consent, and consent is a physical violation. Sort of at the opposite, exploitation is a verbal violation. He was functioning dishonestly at a level where you were assuming he was being honest, and he still got to experience what he wanted. That's exploitive. And we don't call it that. We don't address that. And so instead of facing this shame, right, religions are, right, they create shame, but then they also want to deflect it off of men. And so what you experienced was this institution saying, hey, we've created this situation where we want people to experience shame, so they need us. But, oh, if it's one of our leaders, it's going to create too much shame institutionally, so let's put it on these women, on these wives.
Right.
And so those are the type of things in couples or individual therapy that I go through, is talking about why we experienced a need to be honest, what it would look like to be vulnerable, to be curious. Can we regulate, right? Viewing pornography, you've used the phrase sex addict twice now, right? I don't subscribe to the sex addiction model, right? We talk as a culture, we use the word addict too easily. Addiction is reserved for chemical substances that change our biology. No, it's not the same part of the brain, right? That your husband wasn't a sex addict, wasn't a porn addict, but he was, for whatever reason, too afraid to be vulnerable and share with you either his desires, his fantasies, or his behaviors. Instead of being able to face that vulnerably, typically men masturbate or view pornography, or women too, as a coping strategy, an emotion regulator.
And then also, like you had mentioned too, is that by the time these couples or individual come into your office, a violation, right? You called it a violation. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I just call it like cheating. Let's just call it like
violation to sexual health principles. Any of them.
Sure. It's usually someone had cheated or someone had done something that they broke whatever the couple had agreed upon, and they broke that agreement. And so you're seeing these couples afterwards, and is what you're saying is it's because they were not able to be honest with each other with whatever their fantasies are. So let's talk about that, I guess, like to help people that are that haven't gotten to that point where like they're just having those curiosities and they are wanting to be curious. What can you tell somebody that is listening that's like, yeah, I've honestly always had that curiosity to do this or that. How do I speak to my spouse about it?
Pick something that you think they'll respond most generously to. Share with them what you see on your phone. Say, hey, man, this looks appealing. Titillating, right? This is interesting to me. But to get over the fear, it starts with giving yourself permission, doing it, educating yourself, and just practicing it. Just practicing vulnerability. Pick the thing you think that he, or for you, right? If I were talking, pick one thing you think he would most positively respond to, and try it and see what happens.
So you're saying like even something like pornography or something, that if they saw something and they're like, oh, I'd really like to try this with my wife, because it's usually men, right, that are viewing the pornography, or is that not right?
Men report viewing more. They do view pornography more often, but it's not always who end up in our offices. But yeah, if it's so if you want me to talk to those men right now, Next time you're watching a show and there's sex going on, push pause and ask your wife or partner a question. Have you ever done that? Would you be interested in that? When you push pause during a show you're watching together, that might be something that they could start with.
Okay, that's very easy. I feel like that's a good start. And then that way it just kind of opens up that dialogue so that you can ask more questions. Like, even like I had to press my husband very, very hard when I asked him, like, what is your fantasy? Like, what, like, we've done a lot of things up to this point. We've, experimented with toys and things like, and we're also like just learning, right? Like, this is still very, very new for us. And we're like, and it's hard because guess what? You don't get to test out those toys before you buy them. They're expensive. And
They
so
are
like,
expensive.
I'm like reading all the reviews, and Amazon just keeps delivering boxes to my house. But it's really hard to even find like, okay, what do you like? What's fun? And if you don't like it, maybe it's just because you're uncomfortable. So let's try it again later. And like, but I was I saying is I had to really press him very, very hard for him to tell me what his fantasy was, because I don't know if he was afraid. It's the shame, right?
Yeah,
The shame,
it's the shame.
the worry of me judging him, the worry of, I don't know, me maybe thinking that I'm not enough, maybe, right? Like if you're wanting to have like a threesome, which we've never done, and we've never experienced in swinging or anything like that, but and Natasha helped for help with this is that she's like, and sometimes it's just a fantasy, and
That's what I was about.
sometimes
Yep.
yeah. And
Yeah.
sometimes it just ends with that, where it's like, but we should be able to communicate that with our partner and say, like, this is what my fantasies are. Like, if you're supposed to be best friends and be married and share everything, we should be able to share all of our sexual like secrets, I guess, but and not make them secret.
You can start with your fantasies, like you said, right? When we look at fantasy research and ask people, do they engage them? Only 1 out of 5 people says they have, even though 4 out of 5 say they want to. They're fantasies, like you said. It might just stay in that realm, right? We can ask you, right? I'm guessing most of your listeners are in this questioning or post-religious state, right? Like I said, easiest thing, if you're watching new TV shows that you haven't watched before and you got 1 or 2 decades of shows to catch up on, push pause when you're watching them. The other thing you can do is a yes, no, maybe list or app. There's an app, for example, called X Confessions. You download it, and it's literally like dating. It's like it'll say an activity, and both of you can swipe left or right to something, and then you'll know. Oh, I didn't know both of us swiped right on that. Or so that's another thing that your listeners or the two of you can do is down. There's lists of them. They're called yes, no, maybe lists, or just a yes, no, maybe app. And if you do it in real life, you can put yes, no, or maybe. If you do it on the app, it's either yes or no. Oh, I didn't know you and I both thought this. Let's give that a try. Or does that mean we want to give it a try just because it's a yes? So it's having these conversations. It
You
starts with
realize my husband is literally like just showed up his phone. He's like, I got it right now.
downloaded the app. There you go, right? But you can have these, right? So most of us too in this space are like, hey, what are our thoughts, right? Do we know whether, right? Because I was this sex therapist, this new therapist working with all these, right, LGBTQ clients, I got to ask myself, whoa, what is my sexual orientation? What is my gendered experience? What is my relationship to, you know, I am just a cis het old white monogamous guy, but I know that. Have you and your husband, can people that are in these questioning space say, hey, are you comfortable with your sexuality? Do you feel like, hey, we were only told that we're, this gender, heterosexual, and monogamous? You can start with those 3 things. It's called GSRD: gender, sexuality, and relationship status or diversity, right? You can start with simple things like that. Like, hey, I think you experience life as a male or female. Do you? Do you ever feel like, when do you feel most male? Like, he could ask, hey, male, when do you feel most masculine? And you can ask him, when do you feel most feminine? Right? How, do you ever fantasize about what not sex outside of our monogamous relationship? And just if it can start with that, stay in that fantasy space. And like I said, pushing pause when you're watching shows, or even say, hey, this is what I just saw on my phone and I felt blank. Pick a word and tell how you felt when you saw, I don't know, I'm guessing he sees thirst traps on his phone. Do you see thirst traps of men or women on your phone? Do you have thoughts when you look at them? Does he know that? These are ideas of things you can talk about.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that. No, I don't, because all I get is anti-Mormon stuff on my reels. That's all that comes across my stuff. I don't get anything fun. I need to change my algorithm. I don't get anything fun.
Somehow the algorithm I get missionaries now all the time, and it's like twice as many sister missionaries to elders.
Don't even get me started. The church is, I feel like they're pushing that. Don't even get me started. I can't. They're paying influencers now. I can't even handle it. I'm like, they're using tithing funds. It's a whole different thing. I can't even go down that rabbit hole right now. But I feel like so many people that leave the Mormon church all have so much better sex life. And I know it's not just because we're ditching those ugly white, like marshmallow man garments. And finally, like, I'm able to wear a sexy pair of bra and panties. And like, we were just in Mexico and we were walking somewhere and I'm like, I don't have any panties on. Like, I can say that. And he thinks it's so hot. And he's like, I think I asked him to do something and he's like, show me your tits. And I'm like, okay, here. And I can just do that. I don't have to be like, oh, okay. Like, I'm covered in all of
three layers of clothing.
Exactly. I don't have to do that. And my boobs are the same as they were when I was wearing garments, but they are so much more like desirable to look at. And it's like, why did I not feel comfortable being able to do that and be fun and playful sexually with my husband when I was an active Mormon? And I mean, like, and now I am.
Yeah. That's a great question for you. Like you said, you can ask your partner, your listeners, what's it like for you not to wear garments, and what's it like for me not to wear garments? You can ask each other those questions. That's what the two of you're having those conversations. These are conversations that people can have that they don't even realize, right? It's such a garments, boy. Mormon wives are competing in these basically men's underwear against everything else that their husband gets to look at that are wearing little to nothing.
And now he says that is like the best part of his day is watching me walk to bed.
I remember talking to some former colleagues, and I said to one, you know what the best thing about, and this is a seminary teacher, full-time seminary teacher, is, you know what the best thing about not doing church anymore? I said, my wife's underwear. You know what the second best thing is? My underwear.
It is so true, though.
That's life, though. But those are questions you can have. What's it like for you to live life without wearing them? And what's it like for me not to wear them?
You've got this couple that is coming to you and they have experienced infidelity due to all of the reasons that we've talked about. And because that's the point when you finally see them in your office.
Not all of them, but that's often a reason.
Often. So they come in. What is your first step to healing this marriage?
Lots of what we've talked about so far. It's finding out, right? What's it like to experience this and it's not always the male in a heterosexual relationship that's been unfaithful. It also includes females, right? But we can stick with that scenario if you'd like. But it's finding out what led to this decision, right? Why did you feel need to be secret? What led to the discovery? Usually it's been discovered instead of sharing, right? And going through the process of creating safety again for the partner that's experienced this betrayal and helping them figure out, both of them, their emotional regulation skills. That's one of the main things I test and check in for is, right, what do you have to turn to regulate yourself other than pornography, masturbation? I'll check in with these clients if that's their issue or this unfaithfulness. But you start it with what's it like for you to at the time and right now, and what are your goals? I figure out the goals, right? Whether it's unfaithfulness or just, just because two individuals that have been married leave a high demand religion together does not necessarily mean they're going to stay together. It's for many people, it's to realize, and you've had people on your podcast that have found this out, right? That, hey, the only reason we got married was because of the church. And it was a positive experience for us for the most part, but we really don't like each other.
I also think, and this is kind of what we are dealing with within our own therapy, is that we are now two completely different people than we were when we got married. And it's not because it's a midlife crisis or we're changing or anything like that. It's truly because, like, I'm not that Mormon girl that he married, and he's not that Mormon return missionary that I married. So now we are having to almost date again, if that makes sense. Like, we have to get to know each other and make sure that we do like each other. And those are things that we should have been doing before we were married that we are now doing at, in our 40s.
Well, that's a great answer to the previous questions. What can couples do that are listening to this? If a couple is listening to your podcast, right, is to court each other, to start over, to ask where do you feel like I am just making assumptions? How would I treat this partner of how many years, right? If we were first dating again, what can I do to check in for men, right? To check in on these maybe very traditional gender roles in the household. Should I be doing more and different, especially if they're getting to this space like you and I might be I'm in an empty nesterhood. You're not there, but you're closer to less kids in the house, right?
I have a 7-year-old, so no.
We're empty nesters, so I apologize. It's a nice state of life. But to figure out, right, what would we like the division of labor to be around the house? If we were to start over today, would the female partner be doing as much household labor as you're doing right now? Those are just topics so many different topics to talk about.
Yeah. And well, mostly is what you're finding is that there's some sort of a sexual dysfunction when people are having problems within their marriage.
Yeah. And often, right, but going back to the fear, I will have gotten more clients in my office with what we call a desire discrepancy. If that's one of the dysfunctions, it's often the female partner that says, I'd like to have sex with him, but he's afraid to because of purity culture. He isn't comfortable with it. Especially this often can occur whether or not their partners or mothers not, but when right, a man in purity culture, when his wife becomes not just a girlfriend or wife, but now a mother and experience a term we call matrescence, and he experiences putrescence, this process of becoming a mother, right? She can change in the world to him. I will comfortably ask clients, regardless of their religion, it sounds like one of you would really like to fuck the other person, but the other person's afraid to get fucked. And it's been both genders that I've shared that with in and out of religion. I'll say, correct, please forgive me or change my language if you don't agree with me. And I'll have these believing clients shaking their heads saying, yep, that's exactly our situation. One of us is afraid. One of us is not comfortable with being erotic. Or if they're male, they're comfortable because only with their solo sexual behaviors. And how can we bring that solo private sexual life, that private sexual behaviors into your life and your partner relationship?
And what are you referring to with the private sexual behaviors? Is that just
That's
masturbation?
Pornography and masturbation. Sorry, that's me being a therapist using therapy language again.
That's okay. I just want to make sure I'm understanding and all the listeners are also understanding correctly. Okay, so and basically that should be okay within any religion. Like, I guess like, I don't know if I would have been able to get a temple recommend or to be able to answer the question honestly without saying, at the time, obviously I didn't masturbate, but even, like There will be times where I'll just wake up and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to masturbate. Okay. And my husband's already at work, and like that should be okay. Is that something that would be okay within the Mormon church as a married couple? Is that something that, like, could I even get a recommend?
That is a good question that there's official and unofficial answers to. And really the answer is it depends on your bishop whether or not you will get a temple recommend. If it depends often on your age or your gender. If you tell your bishop that you masturbate or view pornography and masturbate, it is all called, it's bishop roulette. It's a luck of the draw. It depends on how that particular professional individual, right, the neighborhood plumber, neighborhood dentist, what he thinks or wants to say in a given day. Officially, the church says, and well, they don't, I don't know where to find it, but I asked one of my bosses to explore it for me. Yes, masturbation is a sin according to the LDS Church.
Even if you're married.
Even if you're married. Hopefully, it is normal behavior. It's healthy behavior.
How are you able to help somebody that is within the Mormon religion? How could you help them be able to have a healthy sexual relationship within their marriage?
I honor their beliefs, but ask them to tell them I'm a sex therapist, and so I'm assuming you're coming to me because you want to know what sex therapist and science says. And then if I say something you don't want me to say, please let me know. So, what? So then I ask them, what is this like for you? It's different for everybody. Are you? I ask them about their masturbation, their solo sexual behavior. I ask them about what they keep private from their partners. I ask them why they keep it private from their partners. If they're together, I ask different questions. I just ask a lot of questions, Mel.
You ask the questions. Do you also give them advice? I feel like my therapist gives me way too much advice. He's like the opposite. He's like all about the advice, and most therapists are leading questions, right?
I give information. Like I've done in this, here's the top 7, most common fantasies. Here, right. Hopefully as a female individual, you are familiar with your body, that you have given yourself permission to know what you enjoy and to experience yourself to orgasm, right? I know, the most common positions and ways that females can enjoy and experience more pleasure when in penetrative sex with their partners. I give information, research, frameworks. Here's a framework I'm working from, these sexual health principles. You could call it advice. I would probably call it more, here's education.
So I had never been able to have an orgasm during sex until after we quit going to the Mormon church. And like, I remember like how hard it was just to be able to like make my mind kind of shut that off. Like, why does giving yourself permission to enjoy something like feel so scary?
Giving yourself permission is the first step. Give yourself permission, educate yourself, and then practice. Those are the steps to good sex. And what happens is you got these messages, all right, around pleasure that are wrong, right? When you say you wasn't till after you left the church until you've experienced orgasm with your partner, right? During penetrative sex is the least common sexual activity for a female to experience an orgasm. To increase the likelihood during penetrative sex to achieve an orgasm, it's better if you're on top. It's least likely if, like you said from earlier, the least common position would be doggy style for you to experience orgasm. You can increase your pleasure through a couple of different things like shallowing, so less penetrative.
What does that mean?
Shallowing means the penis is going to go less deep into your vagina and more stimulation on the outside and the clitoris.
So you're just putting the mushroom tip in.
Yeah, just putting the tip in, right? Angling, which is where your hips are positioned. Just practicing. You can use pillows, but if you move either your position of your hips or the position of a male partner's hips, so it's the angling of the hips. Third thing that's going to help you receive more pleasure if you're engaging in penetrative sex is pairing. So either somebody's hand or a vibrator to stimulate your clitoris. And the last one is rocking. where instead of focusing on thrusting in and out, we're going to have more pressure of the shaft of the penis against your clitoris and moving up and down instead of in and out.
What position would that work in?
You get to find out.
What? That's not fair. I thought you were here to educate and spread your knowledge.
Yeah, practice. You practice. So if you are, all right, listeners are listening, have insert either a dildo, a vibrator, or a penis in your vagina, and see if you can use the shaft of it to stimulate the outside or your clitoris.
How is it that when someone is sexually active for years, sexually active within their marriage, and still have absolutely no idea how to actually like enjoy sex?
Yeah. It's not wrong or a disorder to not enjoy the sex you're having. If the only sex you're offered is, right, like you said, a chore, you had to be able to take a shower afterwards. It's the only time you could take off your sanctioned underwear, right? If that's the only purpose of this activity, then it makes sense that you wouldn't enjoy it.
Do you feel as though when your clients are coming to you with this sexual dysfunction, I guess that's what I would call it, they're just having problems with sex within their marriage, when they come to you with that problem, do you feel like most of the time it is tied to religion
or culture? But yes. So at a recent training, Lori Mintz, she wrote one of the books I have on my shelf called Becoming Cliterate. Right. She said that in 30 years of being a sex therapist, she's not had one single case where part of it wasn't due to culture, and religion is part of culture. There's all this messaging. Like I said, we get these messages sent to us from the medical world, from the media world, and from the moral world or religions. The medical world says that if you don't have this normal, reproductive heterosexual missionary sex, anything beyond that, you're diseased. The media, that's medical. The media says you're inadequate. So you're diseased. The medical world says, we'll fix it. Take a pill. We'll fix it. The media says that you're inadequate in doing it, and read our magazines or watch our social media so you can become better at it. And the moral world, the religion says it's evil if you do it, so come repent to us. So we have all these sources saying that it's wrong, bad, evil, inadequate. That's the constant messaging we get. What I do with my clients is we identify those messages, and again, like I said, we decide: would you like to keep that message or replace it? And what would you replace it with? And then we just practice. Right? Give yourself permission to practice this. I'll give you some education. You can read books or educate yourself, but then it's just practice. The only way to overcome shame is through practice.
Is to practice doing what you're ashamed of? Is that what you're saying?
Practice, experience it, try.
Because I feel like I can understand how to get through like the honesty, right? Like being open, being transparent, being honest about your desires and fantasies, those types of things. I understand that. I just feel as though that's something that's easier maybe to do, but to get rid of that shame that is preconditioned from such a young age, how do you get beyond the shame?
Identify what it is that's bringing you to shame. Give it a replacement. Learn about it as much as you can. Okay, why is this shameful for me? And then practice engaging in that activity.
Like, because I think that we do live in a society where people are so judgmental, where you think like, oh, that's dirty, that's wrong, right? Like, and I don't live in an area where it's not a large amount of Mormons, right? Like but it is, I guess, it's a religious area in general, maybe other religions. And I don't think that that's a thing that people would think is appropriate.
I would say to your listeners is talk to your partners about the shame. Talk to someone you trust. You don't have to create a podcast and tell the world what you're shameful about, like Mel's doing here, right? But to talk to a therapist, your partner and or someone like that trusted friends, right? Talking about shame help reduces shame in these safe places where you can feel comfortable. Hope if you don't feel safe talking to your partner about it, talk to a therapist about it. Maybe talk to that one friend about it. But when we talk about things that create shame, it helps reduces it, not just in addition to practicing it.
Do you also, do people within the Mormon church, do people become more adventurous sexually after leaving the Mormon church? Have you found that?
Yes, I think that would be safe to say. And that's what I found with clients is like, hey, we lived in this world of where sex wasn't okay. Now, and often it's this desire discrepancy. We're like, hey, one of us is just too, we don't either know if we like sex. We have to check in. I've had clients who have come to me and either they or their partner said, I want you to figure out if I'm asexual. I don't enjoy sex with my partner. There's this fear that one of them experiences around it. There's this lack of either fear or lack of desire. My partner wants sex all the time and I don't. And again, I've experienced it from both in heterosexual relationships. I've experienced it both from men and women. This discrepancy in desire, which is a whole nother conversation, right? Having the ability to turn to your partner, not to get regulation, to be a regulation, to experience what touch is with your partner. I talk to my clients about touch and how when we touch, most people could even watch and tell what you want, but your partner knows your intent when you touch them, whether it's for a gift or to asking for sex, for example. Those are the two extremes. And to be able to turn to your partner just for regulation or to regulate them, to be able to practice touching in non-sexual ways might be where we have to start with some of my clients. To engage in non-sexual touch that's more regulating and connective and emotionally safe. And I talk about gears of touch. There's a lot more that we could talk about in another episode about, gears of touch and desire discrepancies. And
Well, is that even a reality of being able to get to people that have different desire discrepancies? So basically, I mean, what one person wants to have sex all the time and one person doesn't want to have sex. Is that a reality to be able to get them? Like, if you've got, they're on two ends of the spectrum, are they able to get back to like a middle ground through therapy? Is that something that is a reality?
it is, but it might not be. The one thing we don't want to do is tell a person with lower desire that they have to have desire. Right.
Because
That's a very normative response that sex must be, or you have to be sexual. Right. The first thing I say to a partner is that might be lowered. If they say, hey, I don't want to have sex with my partner. I said, don't have sex you don't want to have. Don't say yes if you're in a no. But then I ask, okay, are you in an ambivalent state? I check in for a protective factor, and that's responsive desire. So we have two different main types of desire. One is spontaneous desire. That's usually the partner that's always right. Might see something else is almost right. Not always. It doesn't have to always be, but will be the one that says, I am aroused. I'm desired. I would like to have sex. And the other partner, if he or she engages in sex and doesn't enjoy it, then we say, don't do that. But if they do it's like either eating pizza or going to a party. Like you go to a party. I didn't know if I wanted to go, but I went, and you decide, did I have fun or not? And I check with these partners. If it's fun, then say yes. If you think you're at a zero level or ambivalent, but you normally enjoy it when you do, then let's try to say yes every time. But don't say yes if you're not feeling it or if you usually don't enjoy it. And we start from there, and we figure out, I ask lots of questions there's so many factors that contribute to this. We've got age related factors. We've got history and life experience factors. We've got cultural factors like we've talked about. Religion is a big one. We've got relationship factors about the two people we're talking about. We've got individual variable factors like what I bring or what my partner brings, right? We've got medical factors. We've got the partners factors. So if there's individual, then there's the partners factor. So there's so many variables to this. Yeah, the answer is yes, but it takes a lot of almost investigative work.
Well, what happens when one partner wants to experience, a sexual encounter with somebody outside of the marriage and the spouse is not okay with that?
The biggest thing we want to make sure we have in these type of situations is what's our reasoning? How connective are we currently? Do we think we're doing this to solve it, or because we're at such a great level? And do we see people that are doing this ethical non-monogamy successfully or not, right? Do we have mentors? So I'll tell my clients, I don't do personally ethical non-monogamy. As your therapist, I am trained in it. I have hours of understanding it, but I want you to go find a mentor, someone who won't. And sometimes my clients do this, and their mentors become partners, so they need to find new ones. I say someone that's not going to, you won't want to be a partner, or you won't let be a partner, that's doing it really well right now, that'll help you through it. So see if you can find somebody in that'll mentor you as I help the two of you, or you as a therapist do the therapist end, and you've got this mentor end, and we check in what our purposes. It's not going to solve or fix a relationship, and it typically requires PhD level type communication skills. Like how I check in for okay, if you and your partner are interested in it, what level would you rate your communication skills right now? And if the answer is high school or preschool or middle school, then I say, okay, let's work on those first. That's my suggestion. I'm not against this, but I think that you're more likely if we have these communication skills first. So let's practice. Here's some questions to ask. Here's some books to read. Right? There's one of them behind me called Polysecure, for example. Let's educate ourselves, and let's develop these skills that are going to make us successful if this is our endeavor that we want to go on together.
Do you find that's common, whereas like one spouse wants something different and the other one doesn't or isn't okay with it?
Yes, I experienced that. Or one's more reluctant, right? Most likely in these situations, if it's a heterosexual marriage, like our partnership here, the female is going to get a lot more attention than the male is if they're using the apps. And we check in and let him know, hey, if this is his idea or not, are you going to be okay with this? She is going to get a lot more attention than you are.
And then the response is what typically?
It just varies.
Well, have you been able to find a way to successfully help a couple navigate out of those, like, I guess it's like a different level of what they want sexually?
In what type of scenario?
There are some people that maybe want to be curious and explore and try different things. And then you have the other couple, the other partner is just not really wanting to do anything other than what they've been doing, and they're comfortable with that.
Yeah. So we start, like I said, we start to figure out what are our motives? What are our reasoning behind this? What are we hoping to get out of this? What's sex look like right now for you? What has it looked like in the past? What would you like it to look like?
So you're talking about asking what the motives are to the person that is wanting more. What are some of the motives? Like what are people's reasonings?
Are you talking right now about outside the relationship or within again?
Well, is it different?
If you're asking about what do I do to help a couple who come to me with this discrepancy in sexual desire, we figure out. I mostly help the couples have the conversations they would normally have with me. That's right. What's missing in the communication aspect? What can we do to increase our curiosity and vulnerability? What can we? Let's practice being vulnerable with each other. Oftentimes, right, we want to teach how to say no politely. I don't know if you right. When I think of this, I think of that Michael Scott screaming no when Toby's back, right? No, right? That's the last way. That's the last message we want a partner to give when they're saying no to sex. So I teach a skill called what I call it, saying no with tender loving care with TLC, right? To be able to say thanks, T. Let's do something else or do something different, and C is for cause or because. So thanks for wanting to right have sex with me. I know it's important for you. Let's let's just maybe hold hands right now because I'm not in the mood, or I don't want to take a shower because I feel like I have to take a shower every time, like you said earlier, right? Because, right, it's important to me. And then to teach the partner to show tender, loving care to a no. Thanks for saying no because it's important for me. Let's do what you said instead. So there's a lot of communication skills that might be missing. I have to, if a client comes to me and says, I'm comfortable asking my partner for sex, but I know they don't always want to. Well, are you comfortable coming and asking for different types of touch? So we talk about the different gears of touch, right? There's low gear touch that's more regulating and emotionally safe. There's that middle gear types of touch that are more connective and intimate, that are playful and sensual and snuggly or dancy or cuddly. And then there's that higher gear touch that's more pleasurable and erotic, that's more sex related, right? So can we step back? And if most, unfortunately, one of my trainers wrote a lot of books. His name, Dr. Barry McCarthy. He says most couples get stuck in this first gear of affection and fifth gear of sex, and that's the only type of touch they engage in. Whether it's male or female partner, most of us think it's only male, but it's not always that come to my office. But he wants to be affectionate. He gets an erection, and then they want to have sex. So I talk to these clients. Again, it could be either gender. What does touch look like in your relationship? If we were to say there's, for example, there's three gears of touch. There's like neutral, regulated touch. There's middle gear touch that's more connected and intimate, and then there's sexual, pleasurable, erotic touch. What does it look? What do all three of those look like in your marriage, in your relationship, in your daily life? And if they're saying no to this third gear, what does the other two look like?
Yeah. Well, okay, let's just say you've got one person, like this couple comes in and you've got this one person, guy or girl, doesn't really matter who it is, right? And you've got, or two guys, like two girls, like, right? We don't, whatever. And you've got this one side of the relationship wants to tie the other one up and whips and change and all the things, right? Like wants to experience something a little bit more wild. And then you've got the other one that's like, I'm freaking claustrophobic. Absolutely not. Are you going to freaking tie me up so I can't move? And this is like something that this person has wanted as a fantasy forever. And the other one just is like, I can't, like, absolutely not. Like, how do you work with that couple to, like, kind of get them on the same page?
Yeah. And more often for your listeners, it might be, I want to have sex and they don't. It could be the same. It's the same answer, right? Right. We check in. I want to check in with my clients and find out, right? Do we feel like our sexualities have to always overlap? And if I use my hand, right, I've got, if people aren't listening, on one hand, I've got my sexuality, and on the other hand, my partner's sexuality. And first, do we accept that, acknowledge that even though we're in this monogamous relationship, if we are or if we're not, right? Again, one of my, I teach lesbians how to have good sex, right? I have all these clients, but then to say, hey, how much do we need them to overlap, right? To have these conversations around that are vulnerable and curious, to say, how important is that to you? Right? Again, research tells us that 4 out of 5 people would report that they want to engage in their fantasies, but only 1 out of 5 of them actually have engaged in their fantasies. So is it okay for you to stay in this wanting stage? Or how important is it that you engage in sex with your partner, or this type of sex with your partner? Can you be vulnerable and share that with them? But I like to tell people, clients, right, when it comes to being open in a relationship, there's 2 main variables. There's being vulnerable and then curious. Can you engage in a conversation where you're 49% vulnerable and 51% curious? That means where you share less than you ask. So with that client, I want to engage in X, Y, and Z with you. Whatever sexual behavior this is, tying up or just having sex like we talked about. How do you feel about that? And then ask the person, what do you want to engage in? What's sex like for you? What's important to you? What either conversation-wise or touch-wise is important to you? I think this touch would be important for me, but I can come at it with more curiosity than I do vulnerability.
Okay, so is what you're saying though is that it is possible for two people to have a different level of sexual curiosity and still be able to have a healthy marriage?
Let's figure out where they can overlap. Let's figure out together if we need them to, if how important it is for each other. We want, okay, sex is, it's beneficial in so many different areas. One of the books I have on my shelf is called Good Sex. They ask people, describe good sex in 3 words, and then you get listed the top 20 words, and then they categorize them. We've got 4 main benefits. There's the mental benefits. There's the emotional benefits, like I talked about, regulating, right? It's regulating, not just I get regulated, but I can give regulation. There is the relational benefits of sex. It's a connective, intimate experience. And then there's that pleasurable, physical, right? The benefits of sex. And I sort of grow up, they sort of, it might be more regulating and less pleasurable. So what are the benefits of sex? What would be, then you can ask, would it, right? This more often I get clients coming in, they'll say, I've got this solo sexual behavior and my partner does it. I masturbate and do view pornography. I don't want their partners to become their new pornography, but I ask you, do the two, is it important to you to know about your partner's solo sexual behaviors, their masturbation? Would it be either regulating, connective, or pleasurable? Those are the 3 words I talk about all the time. For you to either participate with him or her or to view him or her when they engage in it. And so part of it, oftentimes you say, we've got this private sexual behavior and this partner sexual behaviors. Can we connect the two or not? Do they have to maintain separate or secretly? If you were my client, I would say, would it be either regulating, emotionally regulating or not, connective, help you feel more connected with your husband, and or pleasurable for you to either, like you said, view pornography with him, to view him masturbating, to be participating in his masturbation? Those are the type of questions I ask clients.
So basically, it's really all it comes down to is what I keep hearing is communication and being honest.
And those are the 2 hardest things because of the messaging we received. Because if you communicate and are honest, here's the thing, Mel, about solo sexual behavior, right? Masturbating, pornography. It's risk-free for men. You might not sound like it at first because if they get discovered, but it requires 0 emotional vulnerability. And there's no threat of rejection from the pornography or the masturbation, right? If it's a regulating experience for him, there's no risk of rejection there. It's secretive. He's almost always gonna experience an orgasm, and it's free of an emotional vulnerability. And there is 0 response that she'll say, "No, I'm too tired," right? Because to be with your partner in these situations requires vulnerability, requires emotional skills. It requires the potential of rejection and how to deal with that. And so these like you said, being honest and communicating, but it's so scary to do that.
So, do you feel like all of these Mormons that are leaving the church and they are wanting to experience all these different sexual experiences, do you think that, like, are they just seeking these wild experiences because that's a natural thing, or is it because they are seeking what was withheld from them for so long?
It's normal for adolescents and young adults to explore their sexuality. Most people in high demand religions don't get that opportunity. And so we experience what I call a second adolescence. And yeah, there's a lot of exploration and questioning. And it may, I can now watch whatever I want. I can drink whatever I want to drink. I can do whatever substance I want to do. And I can have whatever sex I want to have.
What is something that would shock active church members that you see in your office?
How many other church members are comfortable with sex that they're not comfortable with?
What do you mean?
I have active church clients that are completely comfortable with the type of sex we've talked, right? With using a vibrator, with anal sex, with doggy style, like all the things you've mentioned today, that they have, that There's you said you went on that cruise and the boss's wife. Yeah, they'd be surprised how many of the women in early society are comfortable with some of the sex that they're not comfortable with their partners.
That there's a lot more wild or kinky things that happen within active Mormon marriages than you would think.
That would be probably what would surprise them more. And I don't know about wild or kinky, but these normal, I call them normal, right? These aren't wild and kinky. These are normal sexual activities that they're just.
Well, they're definitely wild and kinky within the Mormon world, because do you remember it was like what was the oral sex letter or whatever?
Yeah, the 1980s, Spencer W. Kimball.
Yeah, right? Like that was a thing. Like you're not supposed to have oral sex. My friend, her husband never once went down on her because he was like, from that letter, the teachings, all the things, like it was still had snowballed to be carried on as a teaching. And so she had never ever had an orgasm her entire marriage from anything else but herself.
Yeah, that's unfortunately common.
I had no idea. I wouldn't even think of that. We were having oral sex before we got married. Hope my mother-in-law is not listening. If you could eliminate one church teaching tomorrow because of the harm that you've seen it cause, what would it be?
Worthiness interviews.
Really? Why?
I don't think that there's any value in asking anyone of any age about their sexual worthiness.
And as a therapist, how do you feel about when they ask these minor children about masturbation and they don't know what it is, and they are explained what it is by somebody that is, I mean, it could be anyone. It could be a freaking plumber. Like, I mean, it's usually a dentist, right? Like, I feel like all bishops are dentists, but like they have zero teaching experience or any sort of clinical training. Like, do you feel like any of that is appropriate?
There's nothing, I don't think anything's appropriate about it and anything's of value to it.
Have you experienced any of that with your kids and a bishop? Because you had mentioned that one of your kids had gotten in trouble with the disciplinary thing.
Yeah, I have permission to share that our son was told that he couldn't serve a mission for 6 months unless he wasn't masturbating. And it's the information, the experience that kids have in these worthiness interviews is at the best inappropriate and it's worth abusive.
I agree. I absolutely agree. So after everything that you've learned as like a returned missionary, a seminary teacher, church employee, and now a sex therapist, what do you wish that someone would have told you at 19 years old before you got married?
Sex isn't something to be ashamed about.
Do you regret doing the whole church thing?
That's a hard question to answer because it's I wish I had been brought up in a culture, in a house that said sex is okay to have, but we want to follow these principles of consent, of honesty, of mutual pleasure, of protecting ourselves from unwanted consequences, of not being exploitive, of sharing your values and being safe. I wish that I'd been taught those things.
How was that transition for you, transitioning your marriage from being, active? You guys are both active. You said she was also a return missionary, married in the temple, and then going to basically, one is active and one is inactive, and then transitioning again your marriage, because you've had to transition your marriage a couple times now, and now transitioning it into both inactive members of the church, navigating a new marriage, and also you have a completely different career. How has that transition been? And do you have any advice for people that go through this? Because there is so many people that you've gone through. You're special, I feel like, because you've gone through both sides, right? Like there's people that are in mixed faith marriages. You did that for a little bit, and then also like leaving together. And a lot of times these marriages do not survive. I've seen so many not survive. Do you have any advice, and how was that transition?
For me, during that time, I ended up personally in the fetal position in the closet more than once because of how hard it was. And she lovingly said, I feel like I'm causing this. I don't want you to feel this way. Let's not talk about these things. And my answer was, thank you, but no. But that's just maybe not talk about this for a little bit and maybe have them less often. Because I was afraid of the space more than I was afraid of the harm, the hurt that I was experiencing. I was afraid that if we didn't talk about religion, we didn't talk about polygamy, we didn't talk about the church, we didn't talk about sex, that it would create a gap that would never get filled again. Have the conversations, but you don't have, but have them in a safe amount of time. And I'd also say that I think it is the luck of the draw, especially if you meet and marry in less than a year, like we did, right? I think the four of us, right? That it's okay to realize that when you wake up after religion, it's okay. It'll either bring you closer together, or you might realize you're not. The only reason you got married is because of the church. Either one's okay, and neither way is better than the other or mean you're better people. Looking back, I realized that there would be lessons about Jesus and loving Jesus more than your partner, and I'd be like, ooh, I'm not a good Mormon. I like her much more than I like Jesus. And if you ask, right, if you ask her, people have, like, were you afraid to tell Mike you were done with the church, knowing that he was a church employee? And she says, no, I wasn't, because I knew he wasn't an asshole. And I don't know if you can give or get a better compliment as a spouse, right?
So basically, again, it all comes down to being honest and not having that shame, right? Sharing, communication.
But it doesn't mean you have to be 100% honest 100% today, 100% of the time. You can say, hey, I'm not in a space. Thanks for wanting to talk about this right now. That's TLC. Let's talk about it later, because I'm exhausted, because I'm about to cry, because right? Because it's too much for me right now. But I do want to have this conversation. So, yes, communication, honesty are so important, but it's also, right, what are your coping skills? Can you self-regulate without this, right? Can you self-regulate through this? Can you be okay with it? So those are important, but doing it in a safe amount, in a healthy amount. We want to still be balanced and have connection, and not just have these we want to create safety is what we want to create. And so if having those conversations is too much, then we can slow it down a little bit, which we did. We had to. It took a year, right? We were able to say, there's no need to find out right now. Let's take our time. And that's one of the things I get, right? In faith, take your time, right? You don't ever have to come to a decision about the church. You don't ever have to remove your names from the records. You don't ever have to anything. You can just be floating right now in uncertainty, and that's okay. You don't have to make a decision. You can know, you can sit, you can, I call it, float in this uncertainty instead of standing in this firm foundation, right? So don't be in a hurry. Yeah, be honest and communicative with your partner, but be okay with where you're at right now, within incremental steps. Within one standard deviation is the clinic, right? But baby steps is the easy way to say it.
Do you feel like that's something that's extremely hard for Mormons, especially because we are brought up to basically have a plan? Like, we know every single step. We're told what we need to do next. And so to have that, like, unknowing, like you said, just kind of like floating out there, is not something that is comfortable to anyone that is Mormon, that is like even thinking about, having any sort of doubts, or, wanting to, experiment within their marriage. And like, I remember my husband saying that was the hardest thing, where he was just like, we get to make this decision all by ourselves. Like, this is completely strange. Like, so how do you how do you get somebody to that point where they are comfortable just not knowing what the next step is?
Yeah. So what happens if you're, I don't know if you're familiar with existentialism. So this is basically a branch of philosophy that says that there are four main fears that humans have. And as I tell you these fears, I also like to say that religion is a social tool that answers these fears for us. So there's the fear of death, there's the fear of loneliness, there's the fear of meaninglessness, and then here's the one your husband's talking about. There's the fear of freedom. Religions, and it's the weirdest one, I think. Like, it's pretty obvious we're afraid of death, we're afraid of being alone, we're afraid of not having meaning in life. But this fear of meaninglessness is what I talk about with my clients. And if we're going to go from this belief-based decision-making model of doctrines and commandments and manuals to tell us what to do, and you wake up the next day and you're like, wait, that's gone. That carpet's been pulled out from underneath me. I encourage people replacing that with values. What are your personal values? We've been talking about principles today, sexual health principles. Those might be communication and honesty sound like values that Mel has. And you are rebuilding your life around values instead of commandments and religion and beliefs. And so to have the conversations, right? I encourage having sexual health conversations, having healthy relationship conversations in general with yourself and with your partner to explore what are the main values I have now around relationship, around right sex, around parenting, around being a good human being. And so exploring these existential themes with clients, helping them identify their values with clients is what I do in general with clients, right? Not just in sex therapy. You've been asked a lot of sex therapy specific clients questions. If these are more like, right, religious deconstruction questions, which again, I have lots of training in, not as like a certificate, but helping people realize why do I do things? In the past, it's because of religion felt safe. It took care of the fear of death, meaninglessness, loneliness, and freedom. Now I have to make decisions. I encourage people making decisions on values and identifying what your values are.
Is that hard for people to figure out what their values are after they kind of like throw them all out the window?
It can be, yes or no. I personally distinctly remember the day I realized I can eat, drink, and be merry, and it doesn't matter. I came to that, and it was a scary but also liberating experience. So the answer is, yeah, it just depends. It's different for everybody. That's where I go back to. You can take your time. You might not know them. You might take the rest of your life to figure them out. And you can explore them on your own. You can, right? You get to trust yourself instead of the quote unquote Holy Ghost, right?
I know. I think that was like the hardest reality for me is when I realized that the Holy Ghost was really just my own intuition the entire time.
That's exactly a realization my wife came to. She was having a conversation with someone, and her sister actually, and her sister said, "Yeah, after religion, I realized." Her sister had left 20 years right after high school. I realized that I would still feel the Spirit when I was parenting my kids. And my wife said to her, "She says, that's not the Holy Ghost. That's Holy That's Holy Mel. Yeah, it's intuition. You have your own. You are that source that's been taken from you, that's been rebranded. I'm not saying negative, right? Religions are tools, and some people it's helpful, and some people not.
Find it so much more freeing and satisfying to be able to trust myself rather than trust these men that are in a boardroom making decisions for me.
And that's like I help female clients with faith deconstruction or regular therapy or sex therapy, and that experience that you have that's unique to your gendered experience of being a female and having these male husband, male leaders, male deities. You need to get permission from them to make decisions. It's pretty rewarding to experience as a male therapist when my female clients have experienced what you would.
Well, Mike, I am very impressed. I am shocked that you are able to have this kind of knowledge really in, you haven't really been doing this for that long of a period. And I am really impressed by how much knowledge and experience you've already been able to accumulate. But also, I think probably it's a lot because you have just such a personal connection to a lot of the things that you're able to study.
Yeah, sometimes it's really helpful for individuals to have a therapist that has had the same religious experience as them. And sometimes it's not. And if it is, yeah, I to be able to say, oh, I've experienced that, and believing and post believing clients are like, oh, well, you get it. So it takes a lot. You don't have to explain it to that therapist. Yeah, so I see clients in person and remotely, both in Idaho, Utah, and Nevada, and people can find me on my website, Fuller Counseling.
Are you still taking new clients?
Yep.
Okay, so what's your website? How can people find you?
FullerCounselingGroup.com.
And it's FULLER.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you want to share or leave in closing?
Not that I can think of. This has been a pleasure. And if you ever want to talk about anything more specifically of things we've touched on, I'd be happy to. We can talk about fantasies or desire discrepancies, but there's lots of things we could talk about.
Yeah, I want everybody to leave that in the comments. Like, if they have anything that they want to hear more of from you, like, let's do it. Let's do another episode and dive into something that is more like spearheaded. I would love it. I talk about anything and everything, and I love it. And I am so curious of this whole world. I mean, I think that is probably the most exciting thing about leaving a religion, is being able to just experience and be curious of whatever I want. And everyone should have that right.
What I do as either a religious deconstruction therapist or a sex therapist is say, yeah, here's some healthy boundaries to guide you in that. These sexual health principles, but I've been trained on. They're taught by the Harvey Institute and others, but these, right, go out and do it, but here's some things to help you with.
I honestly feel like we're babies. We are babies. Like so many of us that are leaving the Mormon faith, we are coming out and we know nothing, and we have no idea like where to even start, because we have always been told this is our plan, this is what you have to do. And so to be able to just do whatever we want is scary, and like it's also like a lot of fear, because I've seen so many when I lived in Provo, I had an entire group of friends that would go to Vegas, and they would swing or whatever. And every single one of them are divorced. And so like I've always looked at that like, well, that's a terrible thing, because that's going to it's going to end poorly, right? Like that because that's what I've seen. I mean, you kind of had said that before, like find somebody that has made it work if that's something that you want to be curious about. And like, but then I have another friend that's like, she's also ex-Mormon, and she's just been able to experience everything, and she's in a happy relationship right now that works for them. And but she had to find out kind of everything on her own. And I think that's what's hard, is from trying to figure out like, where do you start?
These sexual health principles, when I'm trained on them, one of the trainers says, they're like the laws of physics. If you violate them, there will be consequences. So most likely, right, those friends of yours that engaged in this didn't do, having sex with other people is not wrong. It doesn't create divorce. But if they probably weren't completely honest in their activities, or they didn't, they might have exploited somebody with their dishonesty. They probably simply violated a sexual health principle instead of doing something that's going to cause. It's not the activity that causes this disruption or divorce. It's the violation of sexual health principles.
I also think it's like really important too, is that like people think of sex therapists and they think that like they're there to help you figure out how to like open up your marriage. And that isn't always the case. You're all like probably, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that your biggest thing that you probably do is to be able to even take like a monogamous couple and to be able to help them navigate into having a healthy sexual relationship within their monogamous marriage.
That's the majority. Well, I do have clients that do come and say, we want to try this, or we tried this and didn't do well. Now we're coming to you, right? The ethical non-monogamy. But no, most of the couples and individuals are, hey, I'm in a partnership and I want to fix that partnership.
Well, I also think too is that there's a lot of people that have sexual assault in their, in their younger years, or like for me, I was date raped my freshman year of college. So I had a really hard time, like never wanted to have like any sort of like rough sex or anything, right? Like that was something that was traumatic for me. And so I'm sure that that's also what you help people get over, because it seems like from what I have spoke to people about with their sexual assault is that they either they either don't want to have sex at all, or they want to have as much sex as possible to get themselves farther away from that.
Yeah, that can be those are two common reactions, hypersexuality or hyposexuality, right? What I like to ask is, right, is to focus on safety. One of the things I like to ask clients or partners is, knowing everything or you know about your life, what's your most compassionate explanation as to why you're coming to see me for X, Y, and Z? Or I'll ask a partner, knowing everything you know about your partner's life, what's your most compassionate explanation as to why they engaged in A, B, or C, or why the two of you are coming to see me? So knowing about each other's past, having conversations with the partners. I experience this in my life, and I think it's affecting you and me in this way. Those are really healthy conversations to have. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I'm glad you can have those with your husband.
I love that. I love like knowing that people have a safe place to go to be able to get those tools to have a better sex life within a marriage, because I truly believe that if you have a healthy sex life, that your marriage in general, everything else just kind of falls into place. And that's what I've noticed has. And I'm extremely grateful that there are people like you that are able to help people, especially people that are coming out of the Mormon religion, because there is so much shame behind sex, and it should be able to be taught as a enjoyable, happy, healthy experience for everyone and not a duty.
Sex can contribute to up to 15% of our overall relationship factors, right? All the different factors that contribute to our relationship. But that 15% is attributed to up to 85% of the satisfaction. So it's it's one of the most important variables in our relationship that contributes to up to 85% of whether or not we're enjoying that relationship, even though it might not, it's only 15% of that relationship. So being able to have these conversations with our partners around sex, like I said, just asking questions and talk about it. Sometimes I even teach my clients just how to joke about sex. Just joke about it. Just right. The easiest way to talk about sex is to add the phrase either that's what he, she, or they said.
That's my favorite. That's what he said.
Yeah. But yeah, talking about it, having jokes about it, engage, being able to say, hey, I know what your fantasy is, but I'm never going to do it. But can you still joke about, can he or she still talk about their fantasy? Right? Could you, for example, in this example, your husband shared with you a fantasy of his and you engaged in it. Are you comfortable to say, you know what? I don't want to today.
Yeah, I have said that. I have said
to figure
no.
out,
Yeah.
to be able
Where
to,
I'm like,
and yeah, but can he still talk about it? Can he still joke about it, even without it being a demand, right? Without that being, I need, right? That you can still have those conversations about it, to discuss it, to say, I know what your fantasy is. And I know whether I'll engage in it or not, and I'm not going to today, or I never will. And it's so, would it be okay, regardless of what the fantasy is, for you to give any answer to it? That's what we're striving for, that type of communication, that type of vulnerability.
I love all of it. I'm here for it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here with me. I am always excited to be able to talk about sex. I just, it's a really, really big part of my life lately. So I'm really happy to talk about it. It's great. And I'm glad that we have people like you that are able to help educate others. Like I had nobody. I had to learn everything completely on my own, and like search the internet and try to find any sort of information to be able to figure it out. And that it's hard. So you're doing God's real work, Mike.
Well, not a day goes by where I don't either say to myself or say to somebody else, "You'll never guess what I said today that I never would have said 6 years ago." That's the world I live in now, is to have these conversations about things we were told we couldn't, that we're not allowed to.
Yeah. And none of it's shameful or dirty or any of those words. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here with me. And I wish all of you blamers really good sex.